Hey everyone, it's Ashley from Wholesaling Out of the Box, and today I'm joined by Cameron Peters and Jacob McPherson. Today we're going to talk about in-person appointments. So we're going to go over all of the things that they've learned over their years of going to in-person appointments and what they recommend you do and what they recommend you avoid. So I want to get started by saying thanks for jumping on with me, guys. And how do each of you prep for your in-person appointments?
Go for it, Jake.
Oh, okay. So first and foremost, we always run comps. We always have everything prepared in way of what are the houses selling for, right? What is that conversation going to sound like? Because you're going to be talking about numbers, ideally with the seller when you go to make your offer by the end of the appointment, if you haven't made an offer already over the phone. So understanding what the market is saying, what it's doing, and then how to have that conversation with the seller is really important while you're there. Because let's face it, I mean, there's a lot of sellers out there that say that their house is worth $250,000 when it's not worth more than 150, right? So how do you take them from 250 to 150 when you know that that's where you have to be? And how do you have that conversation? So prepping all of your comps, knowing what the numbers are. We run our numbers 3 different ways. We do a new construction, we do a rental, and we do a rehab number. So that depending on the conversation, and depending on what the condition of the house is, we can talk about each one of those individually if we need to. And then aside from having comps and everything in place, I always try to go through and figure out what are some of the more personal items that we've talked about from a rapport building standpoint, because rapport is one of the biggest pieces of real estate. And that's going to be something that you're going to be able to build much more aggressively in person as opposed to just over the phone, right? When you're actually talking to a seller face to face, really great opportunity to build rapport and not just talk about the house, but talk about themselves and what's going on and so on. Actually genuinely getting to know them, what the issues are so that you can genuinely help them. So going through any notes from conversations that you've had over the phone with the seller previously prior to going is another piece. And then the final piece is prepping basically an offer folder, which is something that we started doing recently. And that has a credibility kit in it. And for anyone who doesn't know what a credibility kit is, essentially it's a summary of who we are as a company and how we do business so that the seller can familiarize themselves a little bit more with who we are. And of course, the idea behind it, of course, is that it establishes credibility as a company. So we put a credibility kit together. We put that inside of a folder. We print out printed copies of the offer agreement that we're going to make to the seller. And if we end up filling anything in and discussing that, let's say for whatever reason, the seller decides not to move forward by the end of the conversation, which happens, I don't know, maybe 50% of the time, give or take. If they decide not to move forward, then we can write all of the information, the offer, the credibility kit will be in there, maybe leave them with a business card, etc. And then you leave the folder with them prior to leaving the appointment so that they can review everything and actually have something to go back and reference. And then from there, of course, it's just follow-up. So those are the 3 big things that I prep for before going on an appointment.
Yep, I agree 100% with Jacob. Well, of course I do, because we do the same thing, right? Because it's our standard operating procedure for our company, right? I think the key there for sure with bringing whatever you bring to the appointment is bringing something from your company to them and showing them something and leaving something behind, leaving a part of your conversation behind, whether that's a business card or a little flyer that you made about your company, or we've helped a few people make credibility kits, and it's not exactly like what we have, but it doesn't have to be exactly like what we have, but it's something to leave with the seller. Some of the more basic things, I guess, that you take to anyone is a flashlight, possibly a screwdriver, a Leatherman, kind of real simple tools. Don't usually break those out, but I always have my flashlight, always have a phone and or a camera or whatever. I think everybody has a camera on their phone, but if not, you need a camera, an umbrella, and some boots. Yeah. Sometimes it's raining and sometimes you got to go tromp through some nastiness, and you need to be ready to do that versus showing up and looking unprepared, I think. And there's no power in the house and you're trying to look around with your little tiny flashlight phone. it doesn't it doesn't it doesn't work too well. Honestly, I went on an appointment last week and realized that my daughter had grabbed my flashlight for something in the garage, and she knows it's in the car, and she didn't put it back, and so I had to walk around with my phone. I felt like an idiot, right? And that's real, right? And so anyways, now I have an extra flashlight in the car. So I think those are the really practical things. Jacob walked through understanding the file, the property, the numbers, and the person. And then, so I don't want to repeat all that. Just bring the tools so you can definitely, look professional, because you are a professional. But you don't need tape measures and levels and ladders, and maybe a little step stool if you want to look in the attic. But other than that, yeah, that's kind of what I bring to a property walkthrough.
Okay. What do you guys look for when you get to the house? What are some major things to pay attention to?
You can go ahead on that one, Cam.
Yeah, you want a round robin? I'll go first. You go first. I'll go first. See, look, we're going on the fly.
I like it.
So, what do we look for? The first thing I do is I show up a little early, and drive the neighborhood and make sure I understand the neighborhood. Nonetheless, I've been to that neighborhood several times. I'm generally about 10 minutes early just so I can drive around and just see comparable houses. And I'm looking for whether they have fences, whether they have gutters, what style they are, whether they have, again, fenced in yards, landscaping, you know what I mean? What's generally going on in the neighborhood, because that's what you're going to want that end product of the house to look like. And then you show up to the appointment looking at the outside of the house and taking that first assessment of the house. And then I always tell people one of the most important things is to walk up, knock on the door, and back away from the door, like 5 feet or so you're not aggressive right there at the door, because you don't know who's going to answer the door. You don't know if they're going to have a big dog. You don't know anything, and chances are they've never seen you before this point, so you're kind of introducing yourself. And I would say, the next thing is kind of explaining to them what you're there to do. Like, hopefully you've done that on the phone a little bit, but you're like, hey, Cam, we talked on the phone, so I'm looking forward to seeing the house. Generally, what I do is walk around the outside and then come in, if that's okay with you. You're more than welcome to come along with me, and we can talk about the house, or I can meet you inside. You let me know how you're comfortable. And we'll go from there. And then from there, I just take some pictures, if that's okay, and talk with you. It's really not any more complicated than that. And then the process starts. And so I don't want to do the whole process. I'm going to let maybe Jacob take it from there. And what do you look like? What do you look for after that? Because that's kind of to me, that's like the intro.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's really just going through the big ticket items. We always cover exactly what Cam just said. I mean, the appointments start off the same way every single time. And if they do have animals, right? I mean, so, like, we don't know. I mean, a lot of sellers have dogs. So if you first arrive at the property, one of the things that we do over and over consistently, first question is usually, hey, if you have any pets or animals, would you mind putting them away in a back room just so that we don't have to worry about them for the short term here? Would that be okay? Right. So, and that's not just taking some of the stress and everything out of it, right? If their dogs are a little crazy or aggressive, that's also personal safety, right? So just making sure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way either, because sometimes people have dogs that are just aggressive, right? We don't know. So always. And then as far as big ticket items are concerned, once we get through the initial introduction, so to speak, we're getting a picture of each room. And then for big ticket items, we're especially wanting to get photos of the kitchen, the bathrooms. If they have central heating and air, you're going to get a picture of the inside unit as well as the outside unit. And then you're always going to get a picture of the electrical panel, whether or not that's inside or outside of the house as well. And those are typically the big ticket items. Anything outside of that are just the specific problem areas that you may come across, right? You may look up on the ceiling and see that it's stained, right? So, oh, okay, kind of looks like maybe you have a roof leak here. What's going on here, right? So you're asking the seller to tell you a little bit more background about specific areas of the house. So now it's going to get them talking. And in doing so, especially if you're identifying problem areas, right, that conversation also assist in devaluing the property, right? Because now you're really pointing out specific items like, ooh, okay, we got a roof leak now. Do you know how far that went into the wall, right? Do you know if it's affected the studs? Like things like that is going to definitely start getting the seller thinking about like, oh shoot, yeah, I hadn't thought about that, right? So those are all good things to point out and talk about while you're looking at the inside of the home. What did I miss, Kim?
Pictures of the tag of the HVAC unit.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yep.
the tag is gonna tell you the age there. So
Yep.
you can kind of base your repair off of that, because sometimes, man, I think those things look really old and they're really not that old. And sometimes, usually I'm spot on, but sometimes that tag will tell you, if you're not sure what we're talking about, we do a property walkthrough. We walk you through that in detail of how to read that tag. But yeah, definitely want a picture of that tag.
Yeah, actually, so going on the specifics front too, so when you are getting a picture of the electrical panel, you'll know whether or not it's new or if it's old. I mean, if you have the old screw-in fuses, those are hard to confuse with a breaker box. But when it comes to the breaker boxes, what you're really looking for is the amperage, the main amperage coming into that particular box. And we want to see a 150 or higher number in order to suit most of the appliances and technology upgrades and so on that you're putting in rehabs in today's homes.
Yep.
And the one more thing I would point out is that if it has a crawl space, right? Cam and I we're not qualified crawl space inspectors by any means, but if it is accessible, I know that both of us may open that up real quick, try to stick our phone in there and get a picture with the flash on just to get a general idea as far as what it looks like under there. I mean, if you don't see a vapor barrier and things like that, right, you're probably going to end up having to put some money into that just based on crawl space repairs. Same thing in a crawl space as far as an attic is concerned. If you see a door and you're comfortable crawling up there, maybe it has a ladder, step down, something like that. I know that both of us will go up and take a picture of that as well to see if any of the sheathing on the inside of the roof maybe has any moisture buildup, anything along those lines. A lot of the times the HVAC unit, the inside unit is up there as well. So it's good to get a picture of that. And then the insulation, of course, is always available up there as well too, if the house actually has it, which of course it should. So.
Yep.
Okay. So then what would you say is the most important question or questions you ask the seller when you're there in person for this appointment? So if you guys have like one each, that would be perfect. But if you have two or three that you think are all equally important, then that's fine too.
First, brother.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first one that I always like to ask, and for the most part, this is covered over the phone before we even get there. But the first one that comes out of my mouth is, what is it you're hoping that I can do for you today? Right? What is it that, like, how do you want this to go? What is the result that you're expecting? Right? And usually that is something along the lines of like, well, I'm hoping you can make me a good offer to buy the house. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay. All right. So, and then you're going to start diving into that conversation as far as what that looks like. So, and then the follow-up that I would have always at the end of it, you're always going to talk about numbers and such, but I also like to ask, and this is very dependent at what point in the conversation you ask this, but when this is all said and done, what are you going to do? Right? So let's say you get this thing sold today, right? What are you doing once you get this thing sold? And usually I don't ask that question until, for whatever reason, the seller and I, maybe we're not on the same page as far as price is concerned, right? We can't come to an agreement initially. Usually pull that question out when we get to that point in the conversation, where maybe it seems like the conversation is about to end because we can't agree on a number, right? Okay, well, all right, hey, we got the tough conversation out of the way, right? Hey, just out of curiosity, what is it that you're looking to do once you get this thing sold? Because usually after you have that tough conversation of numbers and so on, right, people start to clam up. People don't like to have those uncomfortable talks. So by phrasing it that way and then moving into what is it that you're going to do after you get this sold, they're usually at a more relaxed position because it feels like you're no longer going to be talking about numbers, right? Hey, it kind of seems like we're not going to be able to come to an agreement today. Just out of curiosity, what is it that you're going to do once you get this thing sold, once you move on? So, and then that allows you to continue the conversation. Maybe you start identifying some things that you had not heard previously that allow you to actually start that negotiation talk back up again, and maybe you can get it closed before you leave. So those are probably the two biggest things that I would ask on every single property walkthrough.
All right, Cam.
Cool. I always say, you feel like there's anything I missed, which is in a nutshell. But I always frame it somewhat like, all right, so I think I've seen everything I need to see, but I'm a human just like anybody else. It's possible I missed something. Is there something you feel like we haven't discussed about the house, or you selling it, or anything that I might have missed? And just let them talk, right? And usually they're going to be like, either, well, no, I mean, I think you saw it all, or, well, the only thing I do want to tell you is 10 years ago, blah, blah, blah. And then they're going to tell you something that you wouldn't have known, right? So it kind of lets them, most people want to be upfront and honest with you and share all the information about it, but maybe they didn't think about it, or you didn't, or it's not a question. It usually reveals something that I wouldn't normally ask. And more often than not, it's helpful. And then I always follow that up with, so before I go, here's the next steps, right? Depending on the offer and how that went, whether you actually showed them the offer paperwork, whether you still have some numbers to run, depending on that situation, here's the next steps and the different paths that might be. And I mean, do you have any questions for me? I don't want to leave here with you having questions for me, and just let them talk. And a lot of times they do have more questions that they may not have asked and you might have left. So it's really making sure I'm not leaving anything behind, any piece of information behind, right? Or leaving anything unanswered for them. So those are the two, and those are both at the end of the thing. And it kind of wraps it up nicely to be like, okay, we've covered everything, I'm leaving, right? And you'll hear from me tomorrow or later today or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that goes really well into my next question, which is, how do you end the appointment, and how do you know when to make an offer at that appointment?
So how do you know when to make an offer? So I go case by case on that, because you don't really know. There's not a science to that. I see Jacob nodding, yeah. Mm-hmm. But generally it's more toward the end. And it's taken into account whether or not everything we talked about on the phone is what as it was in person, right? So Jacob kind of covered in the beginning, but you go into the appointment kind of understanding how much money it would take to repair this thing. And then I'm always like, okay, so I think, might be on the fence about the HVAC because they said it was about 10 years old. So I know I need to add this amount or subtract this amount based on the HVAC in my head, right? And so I can kind of do quick math because I've walked myself through that. And so some point past that is the conversation of, hey, I know we were kind of talking about, sounded like you wanted to be about where, and I act like I don't remember, so that they can produce that number again to you and say, well, my bottom is like 100,000. Okay. Well, it sounds like everything, or it seems like everything in the house is as we talked about it, except I'm thinking we're probably gonna have to replace that HVAC unit if it goes that way, or however it goes, right? And so kind of talking about numbers there. And so I'm kind of wondering, that's kind of changed my budget a little bit. I mean, are we flexible on that number? And then talking about that, you know what I mean? And then it comes a point where you gotta make that offer, but that's how it starts, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I already told you how to end the appointment, so I'm gonna skip that part.
All right, Jacob.
Yeah, I think as far as when to present the offer, I'm in the same boat as Cam. It's really it's individual. Every appointment is different. So, and it's really just a matter of feeling out the seller. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's more of a comparison as to, what was the initial conversation over the phone and how close were you versus, where you're at after the appointment or at the appointment, right? Because if you're pretty close to what you talked about initially, right, and you already know what the seller's rough bottom line is, right? If you're within 10, 20 grand, yeah, we're having that conversation all day, because likely we can have an open upfront conversation because we're not that far off, right? Mm-hmm. If you're more like 30, 40, 50 grand, I mean, that's a little bit tougher, right? I may not necessarily talk about the number in that case. It's really a little bit more of what Cam just said, where, you're really kind of having that open, honest talk where it's like, hey, it kind of seems like there's a little bit more here than what I initially thought over the phone. If I'm being perfectly honest with you, it sounded like you wanted to be where, right? Yeah, that whole thing, right? Oh, I wanted to be around 150, and I just don't know if I can get you there. I mean, is that number flexible? Like, can we talk about that? Or, are we just, not going to be able to make something work here? Because that's fine too. Right. And it's just an open, honest talk from there. So as far as ending a conversation, I'll take a note out of Chris Voss's book. And I really, really like the way he had phrased this, but the last impression is the lasting impression. So always ending on a good note, right? Always leaving the door open to have a follow-up conversation, right? So because you may very well have a talk where maybe the seller's frustrated because you just can't get them to the number that you want, right? Like, Mr. Seller, I really wish I could do more, but I've got to be able to make money too here, and otherwise this just doesn't make sense. I mean, you can appreciate that, right? I would love to work with you. Unfortunately, I just don't know that I'm going to be able to make it work at that particular number. But if you think something may change in the future, I would be more than happy to follow up with you. We can talk more about it and see what we can do. Would that be okay? Right? So still being open, upfront, and honest about where your number needs to be, and not flexing, right? I mean, you see a lot of new people that maybe don't necessarily understand the numbers as well, so they start to push a little bit, right? Sellers at 150, you need to be at 120. Maybe you try to make it work at 140. I mean, Cam and I will tell you all day, steer away from that mentality, because I mean, if the numbers don't work up front, guys, it's likely it's not going to work, right? It's not a deal. So why put yourself in that position, and why put a seller in that position? So we get more deals on follow-up because of the open, honest talk than we ever do in person. So I think maybe 90% or more of our deals are all follow-up.
Yep.
So it's just an open, honest conversation, and it's always leaving the door open and always leaving on a good note.
Yeah, that's really important to bring up. All right, so now we're gonna go into a little bit of best and worst. So what is the best appointment? Sorry guys, I have some work being done at my house, and every now and then you might hear something happening in the background. So for all of you guys that are listening, I apologize. Hopefully it'll be done soon. All right, so what is your best in-person appointment experience?
Go ahead, Jake.
Oh, was it me? I thought it was you this time.
No, I think it's you.
Okay. Best in-person appointment. I think the ones where it just goes really easy. I mean, it's a matter of, we had that upfront talk over the phone. The conversation was great. It's fully qualified lead. You show up, and everything for the most part is exactly as the seller has said, right? There's really no surprises. Those are the easiest appointments. I think those are the better appointments, because there doesn't seem to be this weird kind of tension in the air, right? I mean, the seller's comfortable with where they need to be, you're comfortable with where you need to be, and those numbers just work. So as far as those appointments are concerned, they go very smoothly and typically very easily. So I think that's more of like a generalized type of answer, but that would be, for me, those are always the best appointments, when you really do a good job of qualifying a lead over the phone before you actually make the appointment and set it up. Do you want me to do my worst at the same time?
No, Cam, why don't you do your best, and then Cam can do both, and then we'll go back to you for your worst.
I like it.
Okay. So the best, I don't know if it's the best, but I typically like appointments where I leave knowing that I helped the person and I could see relief come off their face. And the most recent one was just a week or two ago. And I talked to the seller. She had talked to some other folks and just wasn't sort of feeling that relationship. And we talked on the phone once and get there in the appointment. And she has a gentleman who come with her and a dog who come with him. And I love dogs anyway. So my first thing is always like, I mean, is it okay if I pet the dog friend? Yeah. So I start petting the dog, and we're talking about everything, under the sun, family and what she did that weekend. And we're just walking, and she's showing me the house. And so this is the bathroom. You know what I mean? But we're more talking than anything. And when it's all said and done, the guy that had come with her had not drove there with her, had met her there, right? And so she sits down, she's like, okay, Cam, so let's talk about the numbers. Let's talk about the sale, right? And I was like, okay. And she looked at him, and I think his name was Justin, maybe. And I was like, Justin, you're good. You got to take off. I know you got things to do. And he was like, you sure you're good? Now, there was a lot unspoken there, but basically he was showing up because she was meeting somebody she didn't know at a property, right? And she brought the dog, and lots of people do this, and I'm fine with that, you know? But basically, she let him go, right? And that was like, okay, she's comfortable, right? And she said, so Cam, here's where I need to be. I mean, can you make that work? And I was like, yeah, I think we can make that work. And it was pretty easy because her number was realistic. She's very realistic. And she said, man, I just knew. And she like patted her chest. I just knew when we talked on the phone, this is going to be the cat that's going to buy my house because I'm so at ease with you and I trust you. So I'm trusting you to get it done. Yeah, I got you. So I've had a couple experiences, similar to that in different ways, shapes, or form, to include the first appointment I ever went on. But that always helps me because I walked out of there and like her stress had gone away and you could just see it. She's like, this is good. And I'm playing with the dog. And she's like, and a lot of sellers have told me this, I trust a lot about the way the dog interacts with you. And the dog liked you from the start. I'm like, well, I like dogs, right? So there's a lot to be said in all the little things, right? And no guru is going to teach you all this stuff. The worst appointment, there's a few of those, but Ashley reminded me earlier, like the one I just went on. We spent the time as we do normally on the phone, talking with the seller, talking about the condition of the property, and everything seemed fine. Just cosmetics is what they said. So even when sellers say cosmetics, there's a step up from that because they don't estimate enough. They think that 10 grand gets something done that really costs 20. So I show up over there, and contractor had met me there. So it wasn't the seller, but his contractor that met me there, and it was his contractor, the seller's contractor. And there's plastic sheathing all over the wall, the back wall of the townhouse, right? And you can see daylight through the top, and you can see below the window where the drywall has literally disintegrated and rolled out onto the floor. Here's this big hole, right? So it's just all rotten. And he's like, and this is not something the seller told me about whatsoever. Nothing to do with a rotten wall, nothing to do with roof problems, anything like that, right? So I'm like, what's going on here? I mean, I thought it was just cosmetics. This is pulling out that whole wall. Because literally you could see where it was leaking in the ceiling. So you knew the roof was leaking, the flashing was leaking out there. And again, there was daylight. So there's a hole through the wall above the window. And he's like, yeah, it's just a little drywall work. And I'm like, not really. He's like, what? I was like, the whole wall got to blow out. He's like, nah, you don't have to blow out the wall. And I literally put my fist out like this and just this hard went like that against the wall. And my fist went through the wall. And I'm like, no, that it's rotten, dude. It's got to come out from the roof all the way down. So that's like $5 to $6 grand because the wall's like 12 foot in itself. All the wrapping around the window is gone. The window's okay, but you got to rewrap the window. There's electrical outlets. There's all kinds of stuff that has to be done just to replace that wall. It's not the most difficult thing to do. It costs some money. Mm-hmm. So that's an instance where that's not cosmetic, man. I joked with the contractor. He said, well, maybe it's a little more. I was like, dude, I could literally get a running start and go straight through this wall like in a movie. And he's like, well, let's not do that. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So that would be the most recent waste of a time and an appointment because that skewed the numbers and he doesn't want to play ball anymore. So mm-hmm. It is what it is.
Yeah. Jacob, what about the craziest thing you've seen at an appointment or your worst appointment?
I
even gave a heads up. You've had plenty of time to think about that.
So I've been trying to think about it, and I'm listening to Cam talk about it, and it's really just going back to all the times where it's turned out to just be a complete waste. Where you seemingly had a good talk over the phone, you weren't that far off, and then you show up and like the seller is just completely unrealistic about what is going on with the house, right? They want a number that just doesn't exist. So I just keep thinking of instances like that, and there's a handful of them for sure. Um, but
Hoarders, cobwebs. Come on, you know
yeah,
that.
yeah. I think yeah. So there was one house that I went into where you could literally barely walk through the place. And they kept saying that, oh, it's going to sell. It's in a great neighborhood. It's this, it's that. It's going to sell. It's going to sell. It's going to sell. And I think we were only about 30 grand off. And we just, no matter what I did, we could not get to an agreement. And there was no mortgage or anything along those lines. It was well, somebody else, right? I've got a guy, got a guy, got a guy. Or, well, three other people have come and looked at the property. They said that they could do 160, right? But, so that's just not going to work. It's just not going to work, right? And I'm only at maybe like 140, 145. Well, somebody said they're at 160. Okay, well, I mean, kind of sounds like maybe you should just take the 160. How can you even gone with that? Oh, well, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to see what else was out there. Like,
Mm.
oh, okay. All right. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's great. If you can find somebody to pay 160, I think you should take it. Right. That's going back to that honest talk, right? Because I know the numbers up front. I know that 160 doesn't make sense, but if you wholeheartedly believe it that much, then maybe you should go after it, right? So, and usually what that is that's just the guy, right? Maybe they found another wholesaler or somebody else who said to them over the phone, I'll give you 160, hasn't seen the property yet, right? That's just a follow. That's all. Because if you really know your numbers, you're looking at the comps and everything, you're pretty confident, you know that 160 is not going to work, or maybe it does, right? Maybe it is a rehabber that offered a 160, you just can't get them. That still goes back to that open, honest talk. But for me, I think the most frustrating appointments are always the guys that are just the hard shutdown, right? They don't even want to have an open talk about maybe what could work for them, right? They're just, nope, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to get. Like, okay. So, and we've learned from that since then, right? That's better qualifying up front over the phone than it is, taking the chance and going on the appointment now. So, but those are the most frustrating appointments by far.
Yeah. Well, and I don't go on appointments, but I went to a property walkthrough this week, and I will say that we were just kind of sitting there, and during the property walkthrough, we give you a chance to like come up with your numbers. And Sean had been talking to someone else, and he comes up and he's like, "Yeah, apparently the guy that lived here killed himself." And to me, that was like a what? And he's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot there are things I shouldn't say to you." And I was like, "Yeah, this is not good juju. What are you talking about?" So just one of my like moments where I was like, "Oh my God, I need to get out of this house." Like, why? Sort of thing. So fun times. All right. Final question. How are the in-person appointments different from the virtual appointments?
I think it's back to you, Cam.
So it's a lot easier to build rapport in person. There's something about standing in front of somebody and making a verbal, no, making a nonverbal connection where they can see your nonverbals and you can see theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you get a bit of that with tone and inflection on the phone, but it's still more difficult. Um, it's quite simply, I think that the phone is more the qualifying to see if it's worth you to go see or if you need to go see it. And the in person is wrapping it up if it's close, right? And if it makes sense, then that's you'd say the in person is the closer, and the virtual walking through the prayers over the phone is kind of the to get you to a second interview, to get you to a third interview, however you want to say it, right? It's get you one step closer. That's how I see it.
Jacob?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. That's exactly right. I mean, the biggest difference is the rapport. It's the body language portion of it, right? And not just coming from you, but coming from the seller as well. Because you can read tone and inflection over the phone, but I mean, the vast majority of how we talk to each other, person to person, is body language. So, being in front of them and being able to read those types of cues and so on, based on what you're saying, is a huge portion of the conversation. So I think that that's exactly right. I think the biggest difference is rapport.
Okay. Cool. So that is it for this episode. Thank you everyone for listening or watching. Thank you, Cam and Jacob, for being on here to talk to me. Join us next week where we're going to be going more in depth into virtual appointments and how they're different, things that you should do there. And if you get the chance, please rate us, leave us a comment, leave us a review. We're pretty much everywhere: Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all of the podcatchers. And that's it. Thanks, guys.